Altman, the shooter's ChatGPT account was banned and flagged by OpenAI months before the tragedy. But the information was not sent to police. The CEO met with federal AI Minister Evan Solomon yesterday. Altman agreed to let Canadian experts into its safety office to help evaluate future threats. And as the war in the Middle East heads into its sixth day, the toll of the conflict is having economic consequences. Oil and gas prices are spiking, even here in BC. Drivers are paying nearly $1.80 a litre this morning, and analysts expect it to keep going up.
This is an area of concern. It has created a lot of volatility in the markets. And based on our analysis of what has already happened in the conflict, we are expecting prices, not just in Vancouver, but really across British Columbia and the whole nation, to continue increasing on average, roughly, brace yourself, possibly as much as 10 to 15 cents more per litre from where we are right now.
He says the situation in the Middle East remains uncertain, causing market volatility for crude oil. His advice to drivers: slow down to improve fuel efficiency and gas up now before potential increases. And a group that's been fighting to keep a 50-meter pool at the Vancouver Aquatic Centre says documents from an FOI and legal disclosure show that senior city staff bypassed elected officials to nix the idea of that 50-meter option. The watchdog group claims emails show staff made unilateral decisions to shrink the pool and kept key information away from elected officials. The City of Vancouver says in a statement the 25-meter pool design is in line with what was proposed by the Park Board and City Council. Demolition is expected to begin late this year, but the group says it will seek an injunction to try to stop it.
And so people are now very upset that as it came to be, the consultation process went on in a very secretive way. Public didn't find out until 10 days ahead of the Park Board approval that this competitive training facility that's been around since 1974 was going to turn into a water park instead.
And that's it for us for now. You're watching CBC News BC. Thanks for tuning in all morning. I'm Leanne Young. Coming up next is BC Today with Michelle Elliott. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, this hour, the federal jobs minister is announcing funding to help softwood lumber workers retrain and transition in the face of U.S. tariffs. We'll get more details. And if you're a forestry worker, let us know. Are you seeking or would you consider work elsewhere. How are you retraining? That is up first. Plus, at 2 o'clock this afternoon, Premier David Eby will meet with OpenAI Chief Sam Altman in the wake of the Tumbler Ridge mass shooting. We'll ask, what limits do you want to see on AI use? That's after 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. You can call us now, especially if you're a forestry worker. We'd love to hear from you. How have you been affected by the downturn in the industry and by the U.S. tariffs? Are you considering retraining, perhaps upskilling within the industry, or looking for work elsewhere? Give us a call, 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. You can also just hit pound 690 on your phone or email bctoday@cbc.ca. We're also live on TikTok and you can leave your comment there. Well, the federal government is kicking in $70 million in funding to retrain tariff-impacted workers in various sectors. It's called the Canada-U.S. Workforce Tariff Response to help those in tariff-affected industries, which does include softwood lumber. Support will be delivered through Work BC and will go toward unemployed workers seeking to gain new skills for in-demand jobs. Also, workers seeking to upskill or retrain as the industry itself adapts, and employed workers seeking new skills to improve their resiliency within companies affected. The announcement is underway right now in Victoria. We are keeping an eye on it for you as well. Joining me now is Maureen Pinckney, the mayor of 100 Mile House, and her community has certainly been affected by closures in the forest industry after West Fraser Timber closed its mill in the community at the end of last year. Mayor Pinckney, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
What's your reaction to this announcement being made right now, new funding for retraining workers?
This is really good news. Obviously, we're not alone in the province of 8,000 workers in the softwood lumber that need this assistance. We have several jobs in the area coming down the line that are very good jobs that will fill the positions of these people if they can get training. And for a lot of them, it is the cost of retraining that is the hurdle.
What are those jobs? Can you tell me more about them?
Yeah, so we've got the pipeline that runs through the natural gas pipeline with Enbridge, the Sunrise project expansion. So that's just right here locally. It won't be ready to really start for a year and a bit maybe, but there is plenty of labor here. They just need a bit of retraining. So this money will be crucial to helping them get that training that they need.
And from what you know of how this funding is going to be doled out, will they be eligible?
Yeah, I believe so. They are definitely directly affected workers when our mill closed. So we lost 165 jobs. We know that not all those people will be looking for other work, but this will enable the ones that do want to seek out another job opportunity. This will allow it to happen.
What has it been like in 100 Mile House since the announcement of that closure?
It's been very tough. We have lost some really good families. They've, stayed with the forest industry and relocated to where there was another good job for them. So, we've lost a couple of nurses. We've lost even, we're going to lose one of our administration personnel in our own district office. And with that is the children that they have. And so our schools affected. There's really no one untouched when that many jobs get lost in a small community.
And when you hear about funding then for retraining, whether it's within the industry, as you said, seeking work elsewhere, but still in forestry or looking to another sector, do you have any concerns that might end up taking workers away from your community who might be seeking jobs in other parts of the province?
Well, there is always that. However, they're going to leave anyways then. If they can't get a job for how they're skilled now and they're looking to retain to get that job, if they can retrain to something that's going to be here locally, then there's a better chance that they'll stay here. We certainly don't want to lose any of our young families. There's always a mix of some people that were almost ready to retire. Maybe they're going to retire a bit early. We're still looking for some of that bridging funding that's going to help all of the other workers that aren't just looking for training. But this is a great step forward. This is a 3-year program, I believe,
Yes.
$70 million that is really going to help those that absolutely have to work and are a little bit worried about what the forest industry is happening and want to get into something else.
Well, that's just it. What do you think is needed to help the industry itself?
Well, that's a bigger forestry issue with the minister and allowable cuts and tenures and permits, and that is a big question.
Yeah, it's one that is certainly plaguing the province. What about for a community like yourself? What else is needed to either replace that tax base or just ensure that there are jobs in 100 Mile House?
Yeah, so for sure, for our small community, the tax loss is huge. So we do need to replace that tax base. And we do still have enough allowable cut in our 100-mile forest district to enable a smaller mill to come here. The pine beetle, big ramp up, really made these mills super mills, and all of a sudden they needed a lot more wood to be viable. We don't need that here so much. If we can have a smaller operation that can, have 100 people working, that would enable more people to stay here, to be in the workforce, and other spin-off businesses to succeed as well.
Mayor Pinckney, really appreciate your time this morning. We are monitoring that press conference, and we'll bring details forward as they come. Thank you so much for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Maureen Pinckney is mayor of 100 Mile House. We are taking your calls as well as the federal government announces, $70 million over 3 years to help softwood lumber workers either retrain to find new work or retrain within the industry, within the companies they are in now. We want to hear from you, especially if you do work in softwood lumber. How have you been affected by the downturn in the industry or by the U.S. tariffs? Are you looking for work in perhaps, as we heard, oil and gas, another resource industry? Or are you looking to upskill to be able to withstand the downturn within forestry itself? We'd love to hear what your experience is like right now. What else is needed to help forestry workers in BC? You can call us 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733, or 1-800-825-5950. Our email, bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Diamond Isinger. She was a special advisor on Canada-U.S. relations to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Diamond's been good enough to join me here in studio. Good afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. What do you think of this strategy, first of all, when it comes to helping out an industry that is affected by the U.S. tariffs?
Well, today's announcement is actually at least a second part or a subsequent part of a multi-phase strategy by governments to support folks through tariff transition. We saw just a few days ago an announcement as well from the Minister of Infrastructure and Housing, Gregor Robertson, about supports for the interior softwood lumber sector at the company level. And that was about different innovations that they could employ. That was about different projects that they could spin off. Today's news is now about at the worker level. If you find yourself out of a job, how can you reskill? How can you retrain to pivot to new positions that might be available both in the forestry sector and beyond? And it shouldn't shock us that this support is required, both because of the circumstances around tariffs and trade, but also the challenges that the forestry sector has been under for many years,
Right.
both internationally and domestically.
What goes through your mind when you hear from the mayor of 100 Mile House say, yes, there has been this impact, but looking at specific jobs to do with oil and gas that workers in at the former West Fraser Mill might be interested in and just need that retraining?
Yeah, absolutely. A program like this, and of course, we'll still see further details roll out. Today's the initial announcement, and there's sure to be more info about specific criteria or how you can access these opportunities. Right. But as part of that, being able to, maybe it's a short-term training exercise to learn about a new industry, maybe it's something through a technical or trades institution or college to learn, maybe access a new diploma or certification to allow them to pivot to some of these new opportunities to, as the mayor says, remain in their community, remain vibrant parts of communities all across British Columbia that are so significantly affected by the loss of these individuals and their economic contributions.
As you touched on, this it's not just being about tariffs, right? The industry has faced all these challenges when it comes to lumber prices and all of that over the years, the mountain pine beetle as well. Is this all coming a little too late, do you think?
Yes and no. I've been, lucky to work in government as well as in the forestry sector previously, including for an association that represents forest companies here in British Columbia. They have long been constrained by the regulatory environment here in BC, for better or worse, in terms of environmental policy, tax policy, otherwise, some of the pieces that the mayor herself referred to, as well as then the pressures from the United States. And lest we be, tricking ourselves into thinking that this is a Trump era issue, it's not. It's a long-term, multi-decade, the issues with the softwood lumber agreement, Canada-U.S., the issues with our provincial government, the issues with the federal government. Any support, I think, is very welcome, especially for a hurting sector, but we need to put the groundwork in place that we're not going to find ourselves in an even more dire situation in the weeks or months ahead with more mills closing or curtailing their operations.
Right. And so when it comes to where workers might go, we heard an example there, but what are the actual, those in-demand jobs? That's the press release, right? To gain new skills for in-demand jobs. What kind of jobs are we talking about here?
I mean, that's a great question. I defer to the federal government to understand what they're identifying as those growth categories. Normally, when there is targeted funding on a sectoral level or specific to workers, they do identify sort of a certain list of professions, a certain list of in-demand skill sets, because they don't necessarily want folks going to reskill and retrain for an equally constrained job that doesn't exist.
Exactly. Yes. So what are some examples? And I know you don't know those specifics. I don't see them in the press release. We'll see if that comes out in the press conference right now. But where are people to go?
Yeah, especially at the small town community level, you don't have a lot of employment options. Often these are company towns that are largely dominated by one or two or maximum three companies and players. And so when one of them is no longer operating or has to lay off a large number of workers, that's a huge shift. And as the mayor alluded to, perhaps one member of your household is employed in the forestry sector, no longer has a job, but that means that your spouse who's a healthcare worker or your spouse who works in another facet of the community can no longer afford to live there or needs to relocate with you to seek better and alternative employment.
Let's take a call here. We are speaking about an announcement happening right now in Victoria. Patty Hajdu, the federal jobs minister, talking about $70.4 million over 3 years to be invested in a program that would support workers within various industries, but softwood lumber being one of them, and that would be 8,000 workers in BC to either build new skills for what they are calling in-demand jobs or upskill within the industry itself and within the companies that they already work for. So we're asking you, I'd love to hear from you if you are in forestry. What do you think of this idea, this funding, and what kinds of training would you be interested in? How have you been affected by the downturn in the industry? What kind of help do forest workers need? 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. My guest is Diamond Isinger, who was a special advisor on Canada-U.S. relations to Justin Trudeau. Paul is calling us now from Vancouver. And Paul, you want to talk about what we should be discussing. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. My son is a forester in Sweden. He works for one of the largest forestry companies in Sweden, and I talk with him frequently. He's from BC, studied in BC.
Oh.
He doesn't understand why we don't retool our industries, because Sweden is much smaller than BC, and he tells me that the standing stock of trees to be harvested in BC is much larger than in Sweden, and yet we don't export kiln-dried wood, and we don't have sawmills, so we can't export refined products.
Okay.
And there's some countries that don't want to receive our wood.
Okay. I mean, we have mills; they've been closing, but I guess what you're saying is you're getting to exporting raw product versus value added. Is that right?
Yes, kiln-dried wood.
Yeah.
and logs. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And can I ask about your son? So your son worked in forestry. Was there a particular reason why he moved to Sweden, or was that just a life decision?
He wanted to race and train in cross-country skiing.
Okay.
And, that was the place to go.
That would be a good place to go. BC also,
And then
but
he
I
had
get it.
kids, and he's been there for 25 years.
Oh,
So,
wonderful.
I talk with him several times a week, and this is one of the topics of conversation.
Yeah, very interesting, Paul. Nice to hear from you. Thank you very much. That's Paul in Vancouver. So Diamond, yes, the broader look at BC's forest industry itself. We know that they are working to retool it. A new plan was announced, I think, just about a month ago by the province. Recommendations to kind of change it from the ground up. What do you think is needed there?
Well, a couple pieces from the caller's comments. First of all, yes, this has long been an issue for British Columbia, the fact that we don't have nearly as much value-added production as we should have here within our province. We have the natural resource available, which is high-quality wood and fiber products. We're not necessarily doing a lot to them here within our borders. We are sending them abroad or to other jurisdictions to add that value, which is where the real economic opportunity is of that highly skilled labor, of the essentially upcharge that you can be making on those products. And so that's something that BC has long been trying to remedy, but it's a bit of a slow game, despite the lack of interest and intention. These are multi-year, multi-decade even endeavors to try to, again, pivot specific operations perhaps, to add the value here at home, to create the economic opportunity for them, to have a cost structure that makes sense, where it's cost effective to do those things in BC. And a lot of that is related to government regulation, how government sets parameters around all of this. So I certainly am hopeful. We've also seen a lot of interest from governments at all levels in things like mass timber use, for example, in building here in British Columbia, that for public infrastructure projects or otherwise, we should be using wood where possible. But that's a fraction of the possible market compared to, for example, what the United States buys from us.
Exactly. And so I know that there's been some talk federally to try and encourage use of and that domestic market here in Canada. But what role then do these trade missions that BC's undertaken to India? What might that mean then for the industry itself?
Yeah, again, it's a really, really long game. You have BC industry players as well as BC government that have actually been present in Asia, physically present with offices there, but as well regular visits and trade missions to try to export BC wood products to Asia for decades, and we have incrementally moved forward in that way. But the U.S. market still remains so dominant, partly because of our geographic proximity. They're close to us. It makes sense to send a lot of things their way. But with the current tariff situation, with the multi-decade uncertainty around softwood lumber, we have to keep pressing ahead on some of this diversification. But again, we have to be realistic or pragmatic in understanding that that's not a solution overnight, that simply sending BC government reps, for example, to India is not going to remedy the situation for workers.
Much uncertainty still. My guest, Diamond Isinger, who was an advisor on Canada-U.S. relations to Justin Trudeau. Some emails here on what is needed to help forest workers. Joanne writes, forestry declining or closing down is a symptom of the natural resource industries. If you look at Mackenzie, this town and many others are boom or bust. The government needs to look at bringing other industries to these established towns and replace it with some form of manufacturing for what we need and use instead of strip and ship. Arguing for natural resources that take thousands of years to create and decades of years to destroy is a dying argument. In a technological age, why do we only have these good-paying jobs in major cities? This should be the question, not how to make a dying industry vibrant. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's fundamentally been the challenge of mayors like that we heard from, of so many others, of how to attract good paying jobs to their communities, particularly when there's so many factors that go into, for example, where a young family might want to live. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation as well, in that, for example, young families are likely looking for vibrant communities with great social services, with a great environment to raise their children. But those communities can only provide that if there are well-paying jobs in that that community a tax base, as we talked about, that would pay for all of those enticements to have folks live there. So government sort of intervention in this way to try to support workers through a transition is necessary, but there's a broader economic strategy that's needed. I think COVID perhaps accelerated or precipitated a little bit of transition within BC, where we saw a lot of folks from urban communities really rethink, what kind of life do I want to have? What sort of place do I want to live in? Do I value outdoor experiences? Do I want more space instead of a downtown apartment, a larger home for my family? Those are assets that some of these smaller communities can certainly promote. But again, there have to be the jobs and the opportunities there.
My guest, Diamond Isinger, former Canada-U.S. Relations Advisor to Justin Trudeau, and we are talking about an announcement from the federal government, funding for retraining workers in softwood lumber. This is BC Today. It's 12:27 now. Another caller now on the line. Iris is joining us from Duncan. Hi, Iris. You wanted to talk about the kinds of jobs that softwood lumber workers might be interested or might transition to.
Hi, yes. I've worked in this field for many, many years and done a lot of training programs and packages for workers transitioning for a variety of reasons. Your caller was talking about labor market information about, maybe the government hasn't said specifically what kind of areas that someone can look into, but there are online resources for people looking for what's up and coming, what's trending, and that's under labor market information. The province puts out website on that. And also, there's just a lot. If you look at what's up and coming, and construction is huge. The trades have been, I think, under-serviced for many years.
Sure.
And we need to get back into what's hands-on. And my experience with people that are primarily working in mills is they're comfortable working with their bodies, with their hands. They don't typically want to sit behind a desk. They don't want to do customer service. That's not their comfort zone or their thing.
Iris,
that's a generalization, but
Iris, I'm so glad you called. So you work as an employment counselor. I'm very curious, and you've worked with people in forestry then. As you said, there are of course different proclivities that people will have when it comes to the kind of work they want to do. So for someone who has built their career, right, who's worked years or decades in one industry, in the forest industry, how challenging is that to say, you can just transition now?
Yeah, that's really hard. And I worked for a number of years with WorkSafe BC as a vocational rehab. And so we had a lot of forest workers that I worked with. And that's hard for them because they, as I said, they have certain proclivities and they were making very good money. You want to restore their earnings as much as possible. And that can be a real challenge if they haven't perhaps gotten a lot of education in their lives. So it then becomes a decision for them about, are they going to continue to stay in their community? Where is the work? Not only what is the work, but then we are talking about small communities here. So where is the work? And are you prepared to take your family and move into a different community where your opportunities might be better? Or do you want to downgrade into something that feels comfortable, maybe isn't going to give you the lifestyle you've had? It's a very difficult, it's a painful, there's a grieving process that I think we tend to forget.
I can imagine. It's so good to hear from you, Iris. That just brings the personal human perspective to that experience. Thanks so much for calling in.
You're welcome. Thanks.
That's Iris in Duncan. Yeah, I really appreciated hearing from her there. Overall, what will you be looking for in this announcement, Diamond? Like, what's something that will tell you, okay, yes, this is one step, but it's getting us somewhere?
Yeah, it's nice to see, at least today, the joint effort between the federal government and the BC government in making an announcement jointly in Victoria. I think that's an important signal about the actual partnership between governments to resolve this issue, instead of money coming from here and money coming from here, without a broader strategic, vision of where we're going in terms of support for workers in British Columbia. What I expect, though, to see, again, in the details that will come out probably subsequently to today, One is, what are these in-demand roles? I know it was mentioned, information's publicly available, but what is government targeting for this specific program? How easy is it to access? Sometimes government will put out very well-intended programming, but it'll be very convoluted in terms of how you actually apply for or access it. So how do you make sure that the barriers are quite low so that these workers who are already going through a very challenging time can seamlessly enter a next training program or a next step of their career? And then beyond that, what the subsequent steps of the government of Canada especially will look like. We know there were some media reports just in the last hour or two that Minister LeBlanc is going to be in Washington tomorrow to meet with his U.S. counterparts about CUSMA, but also, of course, broader Canada-U.S. trade, as he's the minister responsible for that. We have a variety of conversations going on between the two countries right now. And so as we head towards the July 1st deadline for CUSMA clarity, interconnected to that may be further conversation about the softwood lumber issue that will help give a little bit more, perhaps not advantageous conditions, but clarity about where things are going so that industry can make more reliable decisions, so that workers know where the sector is going and pivot accordingly.
Really good to speak with you. Thank you very much. Diamond Isinger is a former special advisor on Canada-U.S. relations to Justin Trudeau. 12:32 now. This is BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for being with us. And coming up in our next half hour, we're going to talk more about questions or proposals for limits on the use of AI tools. Premier David Eby meeting with the chief of OpenAI this afternoon at 2 o'clock. We'll have that conversation coming up in our next half hour. Right now, it is time for a CBC News update. Here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The BC Teachers Federation says its 52,000 members have ratified a new 4-year collective agreement. BCTF President Carol Gordon says the deal will add counselors, learning assistance teachers, and special education resource teachers. There's also a 3% wage increase in each of the 4 years. A day before a threatened lockout, the Fraser Valley Regional Library says there is a tentative agreement in its labor dispute with the union. The employer submitted a new proposal to workers yesterday, and it has been accepted pending a ratification vote. The agreement includes wage increases of 13% over 4 years. In Vancouver, police say 2 teenagers are facing charges in connection with a recent stabbing at Eric Hamber Secondary School. An 18-year-old suffered serious knife wounds after an altercation during a high school basketball game last month. At the time, the VPD said there were a number of fights among spectators as the game between Hamber and Killarney was winding down. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Periods of rain this afternoon with a high of 8, highs around 3 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, periods of rain with a high of 7, highs up to 10 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud in the West Kootenay, mainly cloudy in the East Kootenay. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, some sun and cloud with a high of 10 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs around 11. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you. That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott, and Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim is apologizing for his false drug claim about Councillor Sean Orr. We asked you what you thought about how Sim is handling that controversy on the show yesterday. Robert writes, I'm deeply disappointed in Mayor Sim's actions, along with the ABC councillor. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised such behavior would happen at the municipal level, but it is deeply disappointing. We live in an environment of misrepresentation of any information for political reasons. Integrity, accountability, and basic respect is almost gone. It has been replaced by doing anything to win, to gain power. Jeremy writes, every time the allegations are repeated on the news, it associates Sean Orr with illegal drugs and not about all the tireless work he and others, including Lenny Zhao, have done to help with harm reduction and the people who have a problem with safe drug supply, which is obviously still a problem in Vancouver. It also perpetuates a bias against so many citizens who are already going through an affordability crisis. We demand a Chinese language apology about how he lied to the Chinese community for political gain, and then we need to see some action in the place he caused the most harm, the downtown east side. Frank writes, I think Mayor Sim's actions were unconscionable and he should resign. The political practice of smearing first and apologizing later is something that should be eradicated from public life. I would applaud if the Legal Society of BC instituted a program of pro bono aid to public figures that have been unjustly smeared. I believe that after one or two of these cases, the practice would disappear forever. Thank you very much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca. (12:36) now. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Well, Premier David Eby is scheduled to have a virtual meeting this afternoon at 2 o'clock with the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, to discuss changes the company plans to make following last month's tragic mass shooting in Tumbler Ridge. The 18-year-old shooter had a ChatGPT account that was flagged and shut down months before the tragedy, but OpenAI did not notify police about its concerns. Yesterday, Sam Altman met with federal AI Minister Evan Solomon, with OpenAI agreeing to allow Canadian experts into the company's safety office to help evaluate future threats. Here is the minister outlining what the Canadian government is seeking from OpenAI.
First of all, I asked him to make sure that the safety office inside OpenAI, what they do when they get a threat, Katie, is they report it to the FBI. I said they've got to start reporting directly to the RCMP. I met with their safety officials, with Gary Anandasangria, our public safety minister, who also demanded the same. So they have agreed now to establish direct contact with the RCMP and a unit there that directly deals with this kind of threat, so we get Canadian safety. I also made sure that they have Canadian. I asked him, we want Canadians to be in that safety office to assess Canadian threats, not Americans assessing Canadian threats. Canadian experts in Canadian law, experts in Canadian mental health. He agreed to do that. We want Canadians assessing any kind of threat. I also told him, look, it took 8 months between the flag and this horrific tragedy in Tumbler Ridge. Now you allege that your so-called new safety protocols would have flagged the shooter and this to law enforcement back in June of 2025. I asked him to go back for a full year and assess flags that have been raised in the last year that they did not report, but under their new system they say they would report, to reassess that. He agreed, and he said they're already doing that they're reassessing old flags, which is really important. And I also demanded that the Canadian AI Safety Institute, Katie, which is an institute that reports to me, will be in contact with his team, and I want those experts from the Canadian AI Safety Institute to give a full detailed assessment of their new so-called safety protocol, so we can get a detailed understanding, not a press release, not a phone call, not a meeting, but the Canadian AI Safety Institute to have a detailed assessment of their technology, what they use for threat assessment, so I can get a better picture of that.
That's Federal AI Minister Evan Solomon speaking with the CBC's Katie Simpson yesterday. Now, meanwhile, the Chambers of Commerce for Tumbler Ridge and Prince George have their own proposal. They've submitted a recommendation to enact legislation prohibiting Canadians under the age of 16 from accessing social media platforms and generative AI tools. We're going to talk to an expert in a moment, and we're also taking your calls. What restrictions do you think are needed into the use of AI? You can call us now, 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733, or 1-800-825-5950. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca, and our TikTok Live is up, so you can also leave your comment there. Kevin Leyton-Brown is a UBC computer science professor, and he joins me now. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for being here.
Nice to be with you, Michelle. Thanks.
When you hear what Minister Solomon had to say and the fact that the Premier, the BC Premier, is meeting with Sam Altman this afternoon, what are the conversations you would like these leaders to be having with companies like OpenAI?
Well, first of all, I think it's great that these conversations are happening. I think regulation is really needed in the AI space as so many different aspects of our lives are being changed by these new technologies. So it's great to see this kind of active engagement by both our federal and provincial governments. I think there's really an opportunity for them to make things better, where some tragedies like the Tumbler Ridge mass shooting could be prevented with improved regulation. And in particular, I'm really happy to see this coming from democratic processes in Canada rather than by kind of voluntary compliance processes from American companies. I guess the conversation that I'm hoping that they're having has to do with trade-offs, because any process like this is going to involve false positives, where once you start flagging conversations for having being at risk of leading to violent behavior or anything like that, you're going to make mistakes. There are going to be privacy violations when humans are able to go over people's chat histories and decide what they think about them. Many people are using tools like ChatGPT as alternatives for therapists, and we wouldn't want people going over the transcript of our therapy sessions necessarily, and this can lead people to a sense of being surveilled. So I really hope that the government is thinking carefully about balancing these trade-offs and ultimately trying to get us to a good place. But overall, I'm hopeful.
And now, in the case of Tumbler Ridge, we don't know what it was about the shooter's account that did raise red flags. The minister was asked about that, and he said, well, no, that is all up to investigation right now. Are there any lessons to be learned from other technology that we've had to live with, from social media, to perhaps direct us when it comes to that balance?
I guess the main lesson that I take from social media is that this isn't really a story about technology. It's a story about the relationships between people that change because of technology. So I think the technology of social media is pretty darn simple. It's writing really short messages that anyone in principle can see. But the social dynamics that it has led to are incredibly complex, and they've changed the way democracies work. So I expect something similar to happen around AI, which is a much more complex technology. But I still think the social dynamics that it's going to lead to are difficult to anticipate. They're going to evolve over time, and we're going to need to adapt to those changing dynamics.
So you're saying that it may be a different kind of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it's hard for us to understand what it's going to be like when people start forming relationships with AI agents, when they start feeling like they trust them, what kinds of expectations of privacy they feel entitled to in those conversations, how much transparency to the government and to companies they feel that it's reasonable for those conversations to enable. How people are going to feel about the possibility of a sense of being watched by the government at all times, whether this is something people are going to end up being comfortable with or they're going to push back against. It's really hard to anticipate how we're all going to feel about this a few years from now.
My guest is Kevin Leyton-Brown, who's a computer science professor at UBC and Canada CIFAR AI chair. We are taking your calls. What restrictions do you think are needed when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence tools? You can give us a call, 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733, or 1-800-825-5950. Premier David Eby scheduled to meet with the CEO of OpenAI coming up at 2 o'clock, and he's scheduled to speak to reporters following that just before 3 p.m. this afternoon. We'll have more coverage, of course, here on CBC. Let's go to our callers now. Maureen is on the line in Egmont. Hi, Maureen. What are your thoughts on restrictions on AI?
Hello. AI is extremely powerful, and I don't see a realistic scenario where we don't have it happening all around us. I really liked how how your expert, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name, Kevin.
Yes.
Said that people turn to AI as to a therapist or a confidant. and saying, and he put it in the future, but it's happening today. And when an AI model is abruptly deprecated, like on February 13th, there was a model that was supposed to run for the foreseeable future was suddenly replaced, and people are literally grieving this like the death of a friend, because this was one of their most faithful everyday conversation partners, who understood them in a way that people around them in real life didn't. It's not necessarily a healthy thing to invest that much of yourself in something that doesn't have human motivations or loyalty, but it's natural for us. We give names to our cars. It's to be human. We have to have that ability to form attachments, and we'll form attachments to something as charismatic as an AI instance, whether it's wise or not. Yeah. So we can't. So the effect of closing the account on somebody because they've overstepped a boundary is every bit as, in some cases, not every case, but in the most sensitive cases, it's probably going to turn out frequently to be every bit as traumatic as removing children from a home. It's this is. I'm not saying that shutting off the account or calling in the police is going to make somebody into turn violently antisocial, but we do see this sort of thing happening a whole lot more in families where children have been removed from the home and then have to deal with the damage.
You talked about that reliance, Maureen. Pardon me. You just talked about that reliance that people have developed, right, on something like ChatGPT. And I do think Kevin was also speaking to the present when he talked about that. But so are you saying there's a human connection that people are looking for, and that's what's missing?
I'm saying that it's instinctive for us to form connections, whether with a cat or a chat or the actual neighbor who borrows sugar a few times a week. Sure. just to talk for a few times while doing it. Yeah. A far better solution than saying you have to shut off the account and you have to call in the police when you detect certain trigger words would be to restore a human in the loop. If the AI upon reaching on the account being flagged, if the AI has to disclose, I'm out of my depth here, I'm going to need some backup. The account will have more human professionals.
I hear you, Maureen. I'm so sorry. I'm going to jump in only because I do have some other people waiting on the line. But what an interesting point there. And Kevin, what do we know about the role that humans already play? Is there a point at which a human staffer would intervene? You know, what was the role of humans when it comes to these chatbots?
Yeah. Well, first of all, these chatbots operate. Maureen makes, I think, great points about the growing role of AI relationships. I think that's something that I'm really watching. I think it's a really important direction in the sort of social impact of AI. I think humans were involved in the kind of flagging that we've learned about after the Tumbler Ridge shootings. We know that OpenAI does have a kind of human safety oversight group that looks at flagged accounts and looks at the transcripts of chats and makes a decision about whether to ban accounts and about whether to contact police. And they have specific rules about the cases under which they do contact police. I think we understand from what they've announced publicly that they previously had a rule that said that a person had to show imminent planning of a specific violent act in order to be escalated to police, and now they've changed those rules. But there certainly do seem to be humans in the loop. That being said, there are many millions of chatbot conversations happening at any given moment. And so the scale of having a team of trained humans who would be ready to jump in at any moment would be a pretty daunting thing.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Peter is next in Vancouver. Hi, Peter. Do you have a question about AI and what restrictions are needed or are already in place?
Hi there. Thanks so much for taking my call. But I have sort of an ongoing issue with some of the authorities, and it does look like they have it being deployed already. And this is in the specific example of the British Columbia Nurses and Midwives Union. I have some reports that have been honestly pathetically engaged with in very long delays, very much harm to my family and I. But in their understanding e-professionalism, they do talk about using tools such as artificial intelligence. And I think, I've already been harmed quite profoundly by it. And, it's very difficult to have it engaged with. It's been quite a long time since I've submitted my complaints. And honestly, they just don't really engage with them.
Okay, Peter, I'm going to jump in here because we can't verify this situation. We don't have the association on the line with us to respond. It sounds like it is quite a specific situation that you're in. So I'm just going to jump in and move on. My apologies. Thank you very much for the call. It's just not something that I think our expert can speak to. Roman is next in Nanaimo. Hi, Roman.
Good afternoon.
What are your thoughts on what restrictions might be needed on artificial intelligence tools?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge our ignorance in using AI and acknowledge the fallibility of the infrastructure of AI, because as it stands now, it's the Wild West. Everyone's got their own ways, means, and methods of creating the algorithms that impersonate a personal response, although it's just algorithm and data and metadata, which in itself can be very bad. It can be used for debauchery or for other nefarious means, but it can also gather metadata and trigger points using the metadata in such a way that the human intervention can then double check what is going through that. But the big question is where in the stream of communication is this to be placed? Is there going to be gatekeeping? Right. Mm-hmm. Is there going to be checks and balances before you get too deep or after? I think it's commonsensical, but I think when it comes down to putting it onto the ground, where does it actually sit in the skein of things?
Roman, really good questions. Thank you very much for your call as well. Let me just ask you in our last few minutes here, Kevin, I mentioned the proposal, the recommendation from the Tumbler Ridge and Prince George Chambers of Commerce looking at restricting the use of AI when it comes to children. What do you make of that?
First of all, I can see the sense in their proposal. I read it this morning, and I think it seemed like a thoughtful set of points that they make. They lump together AI and social media in the proposal, suggesting that they be banned both for children and for that both AI and social media be banned for children. There's kind of a movement afoot in the world right now to ban social media for children, and notably at schools. Mm-hmm. Under the age of 16, that I think there's a lot of support for. There have been studies of social media impacts on children, finding that the social media exposure can be harmful, especially in young girls. I think this is a social conversation. There obviously are benefits of social media to children as well if they belong to a kind of sexual minority or they live in an isolated place. It can be a way for them to connect to supports, but there are also a lot of harms. So I think this is an ongoing conversation that really makes sense. I think we know a lot less about AI in children, and it's hard to understand exactly what the boundaries of such a ban would be. These days, if you make a Google search, you often enter into a conversation with AI, even if you thought you were just searching for something on Google. Right. If you speak to Amazon Alexa, you end up in a conversation with AI. It's a little hard for me to understand what it would look like to wall off all of those sorts of tools from children.
Yeah, that's interesting. It has become, it just permeates so much of society. So where do those boundaries lie then? Now, you started off by saying regulation is really needed in the AI space. What kinds of regulations then do you think are needed?
I think we're going to have to think not of AI as one thing, but AI is kind of like computers. It's just going to do different things in every corner of life. And so I think we're going to regulate in a sector by sector kind of way. The way we might regulate the use of AI in psychiatry or in giving legal advice or giving medical advice might be different in each case. And there might be real benefits in each case, but there are obvious ways that things could go wrong. We might want to regulate the ability of AI to enter into sexual conversations with children. We might want to regulate the use of AI to generate deepfake images that resemble real people in the world. There are just so many different ways that AI can have really profound social effects. And I think the main takeaway that I hope that people have is that in a democracy, it is absolutely up to us to make these trade-offs. There's nothing inevitable about what AI is capable of doing that means that we have to permit these kinds of impacts in our lives. And so I think we can and should have our governments negotiating and with all different stakeholders in society to decide what kinds of regulations best serve us.
It's very good to speak with you this afternoon. We'll watch to see what comes out of the meeting with the Premier and Sam Altman. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That's Kevin Leyton-Brown, a UBC computer science professor and Canada CIFAR AI chair. This is BC Today, and yes, we'll bring you coverage here on CBC following Premier David Eby's meeting with the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman. That is to take place at about 2 o'clock, a virtual meeting, and then the Premier will speak to reporters following that meeting at 2:45 from the Premier's office. We'll bring you more coverage of that throughout the day here on CBC.